Hey everybody, welcome to the September Ask Tom Database Security Office Hours. I'm your host, Richard Evans. I'm a product manager of Oracle Database Security, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Angeline, who's the product manager of Unified Auditing. She also supports DataSafe, Audit Vault and Database Firewall, the upcoming SQL Firewall product that's going to be released, and kind of everything. Anything that touches auditing is involved with auditing. It seems like, Angeline, you have a hand in it, huh? All right. This call is being recorded and it will be available a week or so, 10 days after the event. So you can go to bit.ly/asktomdbsec to see those recordings. We've got 4 years or so worth of recordings out there. There's probably something you can find useful on there. If there's something we've missed, let us know. We're always looking for new topics and new ideas to cover on these events. If you've not joined us before, welcome. This is our Database Security Office Hours. It's a direct channel into database security product management and development. We're going to have an announcement section. We have a technical topic, which is going to be around unified auditing today, and then a Q&A session as well. So you can drop those questions in the Q&A panel at any time, and we'll try to get to those toward the end of the presentation. And then again, this recording will be available on the Ask Tom platform a week or so after the event. All right, let's get into some announcements here. So I try to put everything that we talk about into our GitHub repository, and then I attach some QR codes to these pages, hopefully to make it a little easier for you. So in the chat, you're going to see that there's the GitHub link, and then a link to the past recordings as well. So I'll try to put our notes, any sample code, documentation, links to the Livelabs in this GitHub repository. And there's about 15 months worth of that out there. So you can use that as kind of a cheat sheet for the monthly database security office hours. Patching comes out next month. We always talk about patching. Please stay current on your patching as much as possible. You can even patch monthly now if you want. So you can really stay very current on those patches. If you're using RAC, real application clusters, check out fleet patching and provisioning as a way that hopefully can help your patching process for your grid infrastructure as well as your database. And then anything patching or upgrade related, Mike Dietrich is the man at that. So check out Mike Dietrich's blog at mikedietrichde.com. We've talked about this all year long as well as migrating from traditional to unified auditing, and very important today since Angeline's going to talk about unified auditing. There's a My Oracle support note out there that has a traditional to unified audit syntax converter that will help you get started with this migration to unified audit. Now, it's very good at doing this is what traditional looks like, this is what unified looks like, but it doesn't understand what you're trying to accomplish with your auditing policies. So it's a good opportunity for you to revisit what you're trying to audit, what you want to accomplish. Take a look at maybe the sys context, the components, the top levels, or the exceptions when it comes to creating these unified audit policies. And Angeline will have some strategies on that for you today. Multi-cloud authentication has some updates too. So if you're doing database integration with OCI IAM, you can now have users and groups in non-default identity domains. So again, just Alan Williams and the team continuing to improve and refine the ability to do OCI IAM integration with those autonomous databases. We've got a lab on this out there as well, just basic OCI IAM user integration with an autonomous database serverless. Very cool stuff that you can do to kind of simplify that user and group management. If you're using Azure Active Directory, you can integrate with Oracle Database, and Azure AD version 2 OAuth 2 tokens are now supported. So you can do either the V1 tokens, which have been supported for a year and a half now, or you can do those V2 tokens there too. So that QR code will take you to an OCI IAM with Azure AD tutorial. Okay, so you can kind of get your hands on that if that's what you're looking to do. If you're doing this or you want to do this, feel free to reach out. I'll put you in touch with Alan. He's always interested to understand how customers are doing this integration or want to accomplish this integration. Relevant to today is our Oracle Live Lab for unified auditing. So there's a QR code there, or as I said, I put the link out in our GitHub repository, and I just shared that again for the folks coming in. The cool thing about this is, like many of our database security related Livelabs, you can either run this on your tenancy or you can hit that green button and you can run it on Oracle's dime. So you can spin this up. It spins up a full 19C database and it walks you through what current audit settings you have, how you could audit application usage by maybe a non-application account, or if that account is being misappropriated, misused, or abused to access that data outside of the application. We can look at that. You can audit database role usage. You can audit data pump usage. So, this lab could be 2 or 3 or 4 times the size that it is today. There's so many cool things you can do with unified auditing. Hopefully this gets you started with that, and then you can build off of it. Okay. And then another exciting thing we have is a limited availability program that's going on for Oracle 23C, SQL Firewall, and Oracle DataSafe. So there's a UI there that's going to be built into Oracle DataSafe that's going to help you manage your SQL Firewall policies and that capability to go there. So if you're interested in participating in this, if you're currently using Oracle DataSafe and you say, hey, I want to see what this new SQL Firewall is all about, Angeline, Bettina, the team can give you a demonstration of it, walk you through it, talk you through it. And then if you file a service request, you can have that enabled on your tenancy. So you could get your hands on and be involved in this limited availability program there too. So if this sounds like something you're interested in, feel free to ping us on Slack or ping us via email. We'll drop our email in the chat here in a little bit. And you can kind of get in on the ground floor and understand what's going on with the new capabilities of Oracle DataSafe, as well as the SQL Firewall component in 23C. Okay. If you're going to Vegas, have fun. That's less than a week away. You'll be there. There's lots of good presentations. If you're not able to attend in Vegas, I would strongly encourage you to go at least register for the CloudWorld on air. So there's going to be some digital presentations that are available, some learning sessions, Oracle TV. I'm not sure what all that is, but at the very least, if you sign up, then you should have access to it, and then you can kind of follow along there as well, or catch up with it later on the replays. So free of charge, Oracle CloudWorld on air. Go out to oracle.com/CloudWorld/register and sign up for that free option that you've got there. If you are joining us in Las Vegas, it'll be exciting. You'll see Russ, you'll see Alan, you'll see Michael, you'll see quite a few of our partners. You won't see Angeline or I, unfortunately, but there'll be lots of cool things going on there and lots of database security related sessions as well. So Angeline and I have a digital session each. So Angeline's database auditing for the compliance age. Mine is take data security to the next level, database vault. But you've got learning, you've got hands-on labs, you've got lots of good things to do at CloudWorld this year. And I'd encourage you to take a look at and add to your schedule the keynote by our Senior Vice President, Vipin. So Vipin's going to talk to you about protecting the kind of the crown jewels, what's going on in data and data security, kind of give you how Oracle looks at it and Oracle's approach to this. So that'd be a good hour to spend. You can chat with Vipin afterwards as well. So good opportunity to meet and greet, our leaders in database security. Okay. Angeline, that's all I've got, ma'am. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Let me share from my screen. Okay, so thank you, Rich, again, for this platform. So for today's topic is on effective database auditing. Database auditing, like all of you, many of you I was seeing in the chat, all of you are familiar with database auditing. And you are also familiar with the fact that database auditing is inevitable, not just for supporting forensic analysis, but for spotting any abnormal access patterns and to meet the regulatory requirements too. Now, if you talk about the regulatory requirements, the landscape has enlarged and it has made the database auditing inevitable. It's no longer an option that you can consider, but it needs to be there. So the question is more about how do you make the maximum usage of the audit strategy within your system? It's not the question about whether you need auditing or not. That was a decade back, but now the strategy is more like, are you auditing so much more than what you need to, or you're auditing too little to satisfy your regulatory requirements. So in this session, we'll be actually talking about how you can create some of these effective strategies around your database auditing so that it helps you meet your compliance and your security needs. Now, going to the agenda, I'll just briefly touch base upon the regulatory requirement landscape and how it has redefined the very definition of database auditing, and what are some of those common elements that you will commonly come across the global regulations, and followed by the journey of Oracle database auditing, how it has evolved over the decades, keeping in line with the requirements that has come from the field. And then we'll dwell in deeper into how can you design some of these effective database audit. And then we'll look into some of the changes, upcoming changes that are coming in 23C. Of course, 23C, the on-prem is a little bit away, but then there are things that you need to plan for right now so that you can be prepared for when the 23C comes. So with that, let me go to the regulatory landscape. Now, if you see here, like you wouldn't be surprised to know that there are very few countries which doesn't have regulations, whether it's data privacy or data protection. Some of them are global. For example, the PCI DSS, right? So any credit card players across the globe, they have to adhere to the PCI DSS industry regulations. Or some of them could be local, like EU GDPR, which is local to the European Union, but it still has a widespread impact. So one common thing that you would find in all these regulations is the importance that is given to the data and to the aspect of monitoring the access to the data. And that's what's highlighted here. The data is the key element of all these compliance requirements. And the paradigm that we call as database activity monitoring is this key element, which is kind of common and which is very crucial. Data activity monitoring is nothing but to know who accessed the data, when was this accessed, what program was used, what got changed, from where it was accessed. So everything about the data and how do you justify the actions on that data is what the compliance requirements needs. Now let's look at some of these regulations, right? Let's start with the privacy regulations and look at how they emphasize on these audit controls. HIPAA, as you all are aware, that it helps to monitor access to protected health information. And out of the 5 controls that they lay out in their policy, audit controls and integrity is kind of highlighted everywhere, where they emphasize on maintaining the activity records on the use of electronic protected healthcare information and ensuring that it is its integrity is maintained. Let's look at the privacy regulations, the EU GDPR. The EU GDPR is again for helping to enhance the individual's control and rights over the personal data that is collected by any business systems. Now, one of the fundamental principles that it's established in the regulations is to ensure transparency, integrity, and accountability. And for this, the monitoring is a key element because they need to ensure that all these data is used or processed in a way that can be shared with the data subjects or the personnel who have the right to be informed on how their data is being processed by the data controllers or data processors. So the entire the element of the audit for monitoring access to the personal data, you'll find it across their regulations. Now come to the industry regulations like PCI DSS, right? Out of the 6 controls that they have, monitoring and alerts is called out, monitoring all access to the credit card holder data and to log access and to alert on any abnormal access patterns. Let's talk about the STIG. STIG has an entire, you will find across their the framework. The V2 version has a very different approach to how they handle the audit. So they've called out like what are the minimal auditable events that needs to be there in the database? How do you maintain the audit integrity? How do you maintain the completeness of audit, the audit quality and the audit management? It's the entire life cycle of audit is actually laid out in the stick version V2. Now, before I go to the going through how Oracle databases evolved, let me just ask you, are you getting? It's not about like you have database auditing or not, but are you getting the most out of your database auditing? Let me just start a poll to just understand where you are with understanding how much audit is helping you in your systems. Let me just trigger the poll. Okay, I'll just wait for. By the way, like if you have any questions, please do post on the Q&A. Rich and myself will handle, or we will take the questions at the end too, if there are some things which are unanswered. Okay, so I'm just going to end it. So the majority of you have said like, you're not sure, like, are you getting the most out of it, which is kind of expected. And by the end of the session, I hope this poll would be shifted in the other direction of having more yes. Okay, thank you so much. And let me share the results. Okay, thank you so much for this. Okay, so let me now take you to our journey of how Oracle database has evolved in the auditing strategy, right? Now, as all of you know, like Oracle 7, we introduced traditional audit, which we had like a very small kind of a setup where we can audit statements, where we can audit objects, where we can audit all your privilege used, right? And then came the fine-grained audit, where you can audit based on the values in the particular record. Now, with 12CR1, we introduced unified audit, and unified audit set the precedence for the audit standard in the entire industry, in the entire auditing industry. It has a lot of flexibility. Like you can create more effective policies because you have a way to introduce conditions. You have a way to use many of the predefined audit policies that by single click provisioning, if you are using DataSafe or AVDF from their console. So we provided all these flexibilities, and also the audit itself is like an extensible. So if you want to add some of the application attributes, it is available. And of course, the simplified management, and you also had visibility into the audits which are coming from the sys.aud$ or from the audit records or from the FGA or the database vault. You had a consolidated view of audit. So there were like all these options which were provided in unified audit. And we also started with something called as mixed mode. Mixed mode had the flavor of both traditional and the unified. And once you're familiar with it, you had the option where you can switch the binary to the pure unified, which essentially turned off the traditional audit. And that was existent all through from 12CR1. In 19C and 21C, we started announcing the deprecation of traditional audit. And in 23C, the major change that you're going to see is the traditional audit is de-supported. What it means is like the new install, I'll go into the finer details, but if there's a new install of 23C, you will see only unified audit there. There will not be any traces of traditional audit. But if you're upgrading your database, the existing traditional audit settings would still be honored. It would still continue to generate, but you cannot create new ones, or you cannot update the existing ones. You are only permitted to delete. And I'll touch base upon all those aspects in a few slides from now. So the net, what we want to let you know is if you are using database 12.2 and above, start using unified audit. Don't wait for 23C. The transition is quite straightforward. You don't have to wait all the way up till 23C to get started with unified, because unified is their default in the mixed mode. All you have to do is get comfortable with the nuances and then turn off the traditional if you are at 12.2 and above. Now, before we go on, let me also ask you, how familiar are you with Unified Audit, with creating those policies or designing those policies? Are you not at all familiar, or to some extent you understand it, or are you very comfortable with it? Let me just start the poll. Oh, sorry, not this. It's so encouraging to see like many of you are using the pure Unified also. That's very good. And majority are still in traditional audit, which is understandable. Okay, I'll just give another second. Okay, let me end the poll and share the results. Okay, so nearly 50% of you are still using traditional, and there are quite a lot of you who are using Unified too. Okay, that's very encouraging. For those who are still on traditional, how familiar are you with, I don't know why I'm not able to start the next one. Okay, let me come back to it later. Okay, so thank you for that poll. Now, let me highlight some of the key features of Unified Audit, right? Like many of you are familiar, so this must be quite familiar for you, but for people who are using the traditional audit, this might be information why, and it would be a good input on why you need to transition to the Unified Audit sooner. Unified Audit has something called mandatory audits. Now, these are audits that are for security relevant events that are happening within the database, and it sets the baseline on what is always audited within all the flavors of Oracle database, whether it's running on cloud, on-prem. So everything has this minimum baseline of what is always audited. It includes, like, it depends on it varies with the version, of course, but there are a few things like, top level statements by administrators before the database opens, or any kind of activities on the metadata table within the audit schema, or any of the audit related activities, database vault configuration changes, RMAN operations. There is a whole list which is there in our database security guide, and it will help you know that you don't have to create the audit policies for whatever is listed, because it's always audited. And by default, of course, the autonomous has their own configuration to audit certain key operations like fail logins or password changes. So some of these baselines are already established, and you can start with, if you don't have specific requirement from the industry or the regulations on what to audit, you can start with this baseline no matter what your flavor of Oracle database is. Next is the key feature is the predefined audit policies. Now, within Oracle database, like, you will see the list of these predefined policies. The first two, the secure config and login failures. The new name in 23C is Aura login logout. So these two are enabled by default if you had created the database 12.2 and above. If you had upgraded them, of course, you have to enable these two. So, and there are like few other things like account changes or CIS recommended audit. You can turn them on. If, for example, like you need to be compliant with the CIS recommendations, you can turn it on. So we do provide these cookie cutter kind of policies, which are well tested within Oracle. So you can just enable them by a single click provisioning option, which is available from DataSafe or AVDF. You don't have to recreate what we have already provided out of box. The third main feature is around the order, the conditions that you can build, the flexibility around the entire audit management, right? Like, you can incorporate conditions to bring in the trusted paths, or many of the conditions, you can actually use anything within the user ENV context. So whatever is, okay, I don't know why this pop up. Okay, so whatever is available within the user ENV, you can incorporate that within the conditions to make it more granular, to audit just the activities that you really care about. And you can also use, there was a question earlier on the data pump, like you can audit. If you're using the component, yes, you can audit. For example, data pump, you can do export and import, or the SQL firewall, right? Like if you're using that component, you can audit that. or you can enforce these conditions on specific set of users. For example, I want to audit all the users who have been granted the particular role, DBA role. You have a way to structure that policy that way. Or you want to audit everyone except a particular users who are coming from the trusted application paths. There are ways to do that. So you leverage these conditions for building so much precise and selective policies, which are much more effective for your needs. The fourth is the audit trail itself is extensible. What it means is, like, if you need to bring, for example, e-business application attributes like service name, module name, or client info into the unified audit trail. Now, these are not provided as out-of-box columns, but you can still bring in those things using something called named application context, and you have to just audit that named application context. So what it means is, like, every audit record which touches those actions will actually bring in those values into the unified audit trail. And this, in fact, is surfaced in your AVDF reports or data safe report, and you can actually make it more extensible. The filtering also has the capability to, stripe by these extended attributes. You can do a lot more customization and extensibility with leveraging this feature. The final thing is around the performance overhead, right? Now, this is an interesting question that often I get it from the field, like, what is the overhead? Like, if you were to audit the critical events or the privileged user activity, some of the most common relevant events, it would not cost much performance overhead. Like our internal TPCC text, the test with the mixed workload, like we have seen around the mid-single digit performance overhead for around 6,000 audit records per minute. And even if it goes up to 30K audit records per minute, it's still single digit. But we have noticed some scenarios where everything from the application is audited. So those are bound to cost unless you fine-tune those audit policies. So we encourage you to fine-tune the audit policies if you're going over and above what needs to be audited more frequently, more stringently within the database. So that's with I think I used this poll, so let me skip this poll. So let me go to the next part of it, like what is some of the tips and tricks that you can use for designing the audit policies. Now, the 3 golden principles for designing any audit policy is focusing your audit configuration on privileged user activity monitoring, security relevant events auditing, and sensitive data access auditing. I will briefly give an overview about these, but for more details, you can always refer the technical report. You can go through the video tutorial for more details on what kind of audit samples are required, or what kind of configuration, the provisioning that you can leverage. All those are detailed within the technical report, but I'll give you a high level in this section. So privileged users, this category is for monitoring the privileged users because their account are the kind of a very price targets, right, for any of the hackers. They have a broad access, and their account, if compromised, gives the hacker a broad access to the entire database. The security relevant event, of course, it points to abnormal access patterns or some things like failed logins or schema modification changes. Those are some things which you would always want to monitor for any abnormal patterns. And sensitive data access, of course, because sensitive data are the crown jewels for which the hackers are behind. So the visibility into who is accessing and what changes are being done on the sensitive data, especially when it comes outside the trusted application path, is something you might always want to audit. Now let's look into each of these categories. And before we go in, like how do we provision? Before I go into each of these three categories, the question that would linger in everyone's mind is, do I need to create audit policies for that? No, not necessarily. Like our golden thumb rules are like, do not duplicate mandatory audits. Many of the security relevant events that I would just outline are covered with mandatory audits. And you can always leverage the predefined policies which are provisionable from DataSafe AVDF, or it is defined in Oracle database. Now, the ones that is within Oracle database is also surfaced in DataSafe and AVDF, or you can enable them in the database if you're not using the DAM solutions. And of course, there are recommended policies from DataSafe and AVDF also, which you could leverage. You would land up creating custom audit policies only for the scenario which is environment specific. For example, like sensitive data access, so those sensitive data access, or when you build the trusted application paths, are where we would need the information around the environment that is in your end, and that's where you would leverage the custom audit policy creation. Rest, you would leverage mandatory audits or the predefined audit policies. Let's look at each one of those categories, right? Privileged user activity monitoring, like just to give you how important it is, like Verizon 2023 data breach investigation report, which was, it was published very recently. They have highlighted privilege misuse as a top internal threat, and largely for financial gain. So it just highlights how important it is to monitor the activities of privileged users. Now, privileged users, there are three categories of them. It could be your administrative database users, or it could be the database user accounts who have direct access. They're the power users. You have granted access directly to the boxes, right? Or it could be individual high-risk database user accounts who are there in the system. For example, your partners or your third-party service providers. So these are the three set of privileged users whose activity you need to monitor very carefully. Now, let me go into each of them, right? For administrative database user accounts, how do you identify them in the system? You can leverage the user assessment in DataSafe if you're using them already, or you can use the DBSAT report also, where it will give you the details of the user, who is, and what kind of administrative privileges are granted to that particular user. So once you identify that list of administrative users from any of these tools, you can provision the admin activity auditing, which does all the top level actions. Top level is a clause which you can also inbuild when you're creating your audit policy. It's a cool clause which only audits the user-initiated operations. It doesn't capture anything what is invoked from within the PL SQL functions or procedures. So you can leverage this admin activity auditing to monitor all the administrative database user accounts. The second is the accounts with direct access, the power users. It's important to monitor them because they bypass the normal application authorizations, right? So for that, the audit policy outlined here with the when clause with the IP address null is able to capture everything that happens to come over the bequest or bypassing the listener. Now we are in the process of surfacing this policy from our DAM solutions, and you would see that shortly. But for now, we encourage you to create this custom policy to monitor all the access, the bequest connections. The third is the high-risk database user accounts, and these are the typical subset of users or the roles which you are normally aware in your environment. We encourage you to use a user activity auditing provisioning the policy, which is available from DataSafe or AVDF, and you can provide the non-Oracle privileged users in this in the set of users, or you can use the Aura all top-level actions, which is there defined within the database if you're not using AVDF or DataSafe. Now, the second category, that was for the privileged user. The second category is a security relevant event auditing, right? Now, these are the events that typically warrants greater scrutiny because it has a broad impact, not just on a particular schema, but across all the entire schema or the entire database. This could be your security administration events, for example, some database parameter changes or database security policy changes like your redaction policy, or if you have TSTP, VPD, or RAS policy, any of these policy changes. Or it could be some of the database management operations like backup, cloning, alter database, or any of the schema modifications that happens within the data. So any of the security administration events, you can track them by using the critical database activity, database schema changes, and admin activity auditing policy, which are easily provisionable from the DAM solutions. And if you have like a VPD, RAS, or OLS, we encourage you to create custom policies, and the samples are given in the technical report, but I've just highlighted this here as a bullet point so that you will take a look. If you're using any of these, you can refer to the technical report for the exact policy definition that you can create. And the second one is the account and access management. These are some of the account or access related events, which are like user creation, grants, role, or the system privileges which are unused in your system, or some of the components which has data implications like data pump. Now, the account management is, of course, covered within the critical database activity. So if you're provisioning, all the account management events would be covered there. The only place where you would create the custom policy is the system privileges, because we would want to know what are the system privileges which are used, which are unused in the system, right? And for this, we have a cool feature called privilege analysis that you can run. If you're from using the enterprise manager, of course, that offers a console where you can identify what are the ones which are used and unused, or you could run some of these PL SQL packages which are exposed from the privilege analysis to spot it out. Now, if there are used ones, you might want to closely track them. If there are unused ones, we typically recommend to see whether it's not being used, it has been granted some time back and the administrator has forgotten to revoke it, right? So if there is a real need for the unused system privileges, then track it closely. Otherwise, to reduce attack surface, it's good to revoke them from the user. And of course, coming to the third one is a suspicious user activity. The abnormal access patterns is like multiple failed logins, or you spot a sudden activity in the dormant account, or non-business hour operations, right? Multiple failed login attempts, you can use a login failures, or if you're using the data safe or a VDF, you can use the login events. Now, if you're using the login events, we encourage you to exclude the users who are from the trusted sources. So you can exclude and monitor everyone else. And for sudden activity in dormant accounts, you have a way in DBSAT to identify those dormant accounts. You can provision the policy using user activity. Non-business hour activities, of course, is like a custom policy because we need the information on what the normal office hours are, which you can build into the when condition using the named application context. And again, in the technical report, I've given the sample. You can modify it based on what the exact values are, and you can use that custom policy. So that was about the security relevant, and we touched base upon the privileged user activity. The third main category is the sensitive data access auditing. Sensitive data are the crown jewels. Again, referring to the Verizon 2023 DBIR report, PII data is the topmost confidentiality data involved in breaches, and this is the one most privacy regulations are after. So it's very crucial that you build the audit strategy around monitoring the access to the sensitive data. Now, to design an audit policy around sensitive data access, there are two aspects which you should No, you should know what your sensitive data is, which tables hold those sensitive data, which columns hold those sensitive data, and know your users, the users who are authorized to access the sensitive data, because we build the policies around these two aspects. Now, let me take you to how we can design such policy, right? Now, to knowing your data, knowing your where your sensitive data is, which tables, what kind of sensitive data you have, there is a way. If you're using data safe, you must be familiar with sensitive data discovery. Or if you're using enterprise manager, application data model helps you discover the sensitive data. DBSAT report also helps you identify what the sensitive data is. It has a much more elaborate way of displaying how much of data is present in each of those entities, right? So once you identify where your sensitive data is, you kind of have to get a matrix, like to understand, like, who are the users who has the authorized reason to access the data. Now, that could be your application service account with accessing the sensitive data through standard business functions. Now, they are a higher risk only if the access is outside the trusted path. If they are well within the trusted path, you can you don't have to necessarily audit them. So we encourage you to audit access to sensitive data for the users, for the authorized users, if it is coming only from the untrusted path. Now, there could be users who are directly interacting with sensitive data. Always when there's a human actor who is involved in directly interacting with the sensitive data, we encourage you to audit all those users or all those roles which have been granted access, right? And attempts by anyone else, not in the allow list, not in the watch list of users who are directly interacting, always audit the access. Now, this you could do with the unified audit itself, but if you have few PII data which you would closely want to monitor based on the values in that record, right? For example, if there is someone who is updating the salary column of the employee table and you want to audit only if it is in the non-business hours or if it is above a particular threshold, you could do that with fine-grained audit also. So we encourage you to use the combination of unified and fine-grained audit if there is a requirement where you want to audit based on the threshold value of that record. Of course, in 23C, you could use a unified audit to audit access to a particular column. For example, if the update happens in this salary column, you want to audit, that is possible in 23C. Until 23C, you could audit access to the table, not at the particular column level. So we have introduced that capability in 23C, but what it does, 23C doesn't offer is, like, if that salary value is above a particular threshold you want to audit, that is possible only with the fine-grained audit. So based on your requirement, you could use a combination of unified audit and fine-grained audit to satisfy your requirement. So that was about the three main pillars of how you would structure and design your audit policies around privileged users, around your security relevant events, and the sensitive data. And for most of them, as you have seen in these slides, it's to do with the mandatory audits or the kind of predefined policies that we already provide you. Only for a few cases like sensitive data, or where we get the trusted path information, or where you need to you get the environment information, you will land up creating your custom policies. So the other aspect is around managing your audit trail. This is equally important as as important as you design these policies, right? So we recommend you relocate the unified audit trail table to a dedicated table space. You set a reasonable partition interval. Of course, in 21C and above, it's 1 day. But if you're using below 21, like it's 1 month. So if the audit generation rate is quite high, you can use the DBMS audit management interface to reduce the partition interval. And we encourage you to periodically archive and purge the unified audit trail for better performance. If you're using AVDF and data saved, that helps to manage the purge of audit trails. But like if you're not using, you have the interfaces that are exposed to help you periodically, archive them. And there are situations where the unified audit records will be written to the spillover files, for example, in your standby systems or when the table space is full. So in such occasions where you spot the spillover files having data, we encourage you to load them into the audit trail for better performance. Of course, the audit trail view is itself built on the table and the spillover files, but for better performance, it's good to load them into the table before reading it. And we encourage you to periodically gather statistics on that internal table to ensure the statistics are up to date. Now, let me quickly highlight to you about the changes that are coming in 23C, which you can plan now rather than waiting up to 23C, because you have all the nuts and bolts to build the transition to unified audit. Now, in fresh 23C install, you will see only the unified audit enabled. Traditional audit is disabled. No new traditional audit is allowed. If you see audit table, it will give you ORA error. There will be a single binary. The make target that was given will be a no op. So it is just unified. And we always have the mandatory audits and the predefined audit policies, secure config and login logout enabled as it was from 12.2 database. Now, again, continuing, all the traditional audit configurations will not exist. The default traditional audit configurations you would have seen in your databases, like we do provide some of the default ones, even from traditional, you would see mostly from the DVSys object access, right? So those will not be existent. All the traditional audit init.ora parameters are deprecated. So none of them will hold the value. Audit sys operations is set to false. So your .aud files will not have any of these values. Now coming to the upgrade part, right? That was for the fresh instance, which will have only unified. Now, if you're upgrading your database from anywhere on 12.2 to 23C, if you're using traditional audit settings, and many of you, more than 50% said yes. So if you're using them, we will carry over that post upgrade. You will have the opportunity to continue it without any interruption post the upgrade. It will still continue to be honored. We will continue to generate audit records into the traditional audit trails, but creating new traditional audit settings or updates the existing ones will not be allowed. Only the deletes will be permitted, and unified audit policies will be preserved. So we encourage you, once you transition to unified audit, if there are traditional audit settings in your environment, you can disable it by doing no audit and by setting the audit trail none, audit sys operations to false. So that, it will not be in the evaluation path at all. It will only go to the unified audit. And FGA policies also will continue to exist, but there's a subtle change. If you're using the mixed mode, you would have noticed the FGA audit records get written into the FGA dollar. For in the 23C upgrade or the new instance, the FGA policies will generate audit records into the unified audit trail. So our recommendation is, don't wait for the 23 instance to start planning this transition. You can plan your transition in 12, if you are in 12.2 and above, that's the right time you start planning your transition and not wait for 23 instance. Now, I've been talking about a lot of transition, and you might be wondering whether it's like going to be another big mega project, right? It's more simple and straightforward. If you have been using our default traditional audit settings, if you don't have your own customized settings, you can just enable these predefined policies, which in most cases it would be enabled if you have not upgraded from 11G, right? If you had created your database 12.2 and above, Aura Secure Config login logout should be enabled. So if it is there, just disable the traditional audit and you're ready to go. So all your default traditional audit settings are covered. Most of the security relevant events are covered by mandatory audits, secure config, and log and logout. So the baseline policies, baseline audit settings are already there in the environment in the mixed mode. So all you have to do is disable the traditional audit and you're ready to go from there. Now, if you have customized traditional audit settings, probably you have some object access to certain of these tables, right? Or if you're completely unfamiliar with the unified audit syntax, we encourage you to visit this Moss node. We have provided a syntax converter that Rich was mentioning a while back. So that gives you a syntactically equivalent one of the traditional audit settings in the unified audit policies, right? So you would get a similar one, but what it would lack is a rich capability that is there in the unified audit. For example, there is a lot of optimization that you can introduce with conditions, or you introduce with enforcing on certain users and roles, right? It would miss all that rich features. So if you're using that syntax converter, you can review those audit policies, and if there are any room or for the improvements or the scope of introducing these good rich features of unified audit, please leverage them. So this is only the Moss node syntax converter is only for those of you who are really unfamiliar with the unified audit syntax. And now if you're getting started on database auditing, right, you're new to database auditing, or you would like to revisit some of these audit policy best practices based on the 3 vertical categories I discussed around privileged user auditing, security relevant event auditing, or the sensitive data access auditing, scan the QR code to refer to this technical report. There was a video link also that came up in some of the slides earlier. One of them you can leverage, and you can start building out the policies. You can always reach out to me or Rich if you have any queries. We would be happy to, handle the queries or anything that you have around the audit configuration. So to summarize, the entire session, right? Database auditing is inevitable, not just from forensic analysis or spotting any abnormal access pattern, but to meet the compliance requirements, to demonstrate compliance, it's become inevitable. It's not a choice. It is mandatory. Now, unified audit, we have introduced traditional audit in the past. It was there for historical reason, but it has evolved, and unified audit, which was introduced in 12C, gives you a lot more flexibility in how you can structure these audit policy for meeting these requirements, right? So leverage the unified audit, and you can also, create effective database audit strategies with these 3 principles of structuring the audit policies around privileged user activities, security relevant event auditing, or sensitive data access. And finally, if you're using traditional audit in versions 12.2 and above, please plan your transition to unified audit sooner. And it is very straightforward, very simple transition. All you need to do is leverage the the mandatory audit, which is always running in your database, and leverage these two policies. And if you're using any custom policies, custom audit, traditional audit settings, you can leverage the syntax converter if you're unfamiliar with the syntax, or you could use any of these best practices around these audit policy designing around privileged user activity, sensitive data access, security relevant events to design these policies. Okay, so that's the end.
Awesome.
Let me take the questions. Rich, was there anything which is unanswered?
That's it. We'll wrap it up here and then take questions. So thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you next month on our October event.